Druidism is an ancient Celtic religion. It went through demolition and revival. Not much is known about the ancient Druids, as they kept few forms of written teachings. Instead, their traditions were preserved by memory and passed along orally. Druids were revered as ancient Celtic priests. The word Druid itself means wise one. The Druids took part as a separate elite class of Celtic society. They were close allies of the kings. As Julius Caesar is quoted, the Druids watched over divine matters, administered public and private sacrifice, and rule all matters of religion. Most of the details of this ancient religion have been destroyed, but through revival, Druidism has made a comeback. Today, there are over 40,000 people who can identify themselves as Druids and Druidesses. As mentioned before, there's not much known evidence about the ancient Druids. The exact details of their origins are unknown. Despite the lack of documentation, research has provided us with bits and pieces of evidence that gives us a window into their ancient traditions. We are able to see the first evidence of Druid spiritual practice in Europe 25,000 years ago, when candidates for initiation would crawl into caves, such as the Pinhole Caves in Derbyshire, the Calvet Caves or Laxcoa Caves in France, or Altamira Caves in Spain, which are dramatically painted with figures of wild animals. Druidism can also be traced back to ancient Wales, where the order began long before the advent of written history. Not only were the Druids priests of the early Celtic religion, Druids also performed the roles of judge, doctor, and scholar. The Christian Church absorbed much of Celtic religion, this including paganism and Druidism. Many pagan gods and goddesses became Christian saints. Sacred springs and wells were preserved and associated with saints. Many pagan temple sites became the location of cathedrals. By the 7th century CE, Druidism itself was destroyed, or continued deeply underground throughout most of the formerly Celtic lands. There is some evidence, though, that pagan religions did survive in isolated areas of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania into the 20th century. In the early 18th century, interest in Druidism underwent a revival, primarily as a result of the less than noble efforts of one man, Edward Williams. He was also known as Lolo Morganwg. He claimed to have discovered an ancient Welsh book of Druidic knowledge. This book, called the Bardas, was later revealed to be a forgery. Morganwg made up most of the book's contents, including the ceremony of Gorsid Beard Yns Prigden, or the Assembly of Bards on the Isle of Britain. Morganwg held the first Gorsid ceremony in 1792 on London's Primrose Hill. Ross Nichols was also one of the key figures in the revival of interest in Celtic spirituality and Druidry in modern times. In 1964, Nichols, a Cambridge academic and published poet, became chief of the Order of the Bards, Ovates, and Druids, and for that time, he wrote on the subjects of Druidism and Celtic mythology. His main work, the Book of Druidry, was published in 1990, 15 years after his death, and is still being read over 20 years later. The Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, which he founded, is now the largest Druid organization in the world, with many thousands of members worldwide.
The Druids, being a culture where writing down teachings was forbidden, only had an oral literature. That being said, there is not much to talk about in this aspect of Druidism. There are over 300 deities mentioned in archaeological record. These gods and goddesses are believed to be local deities because the Druids were not a single religious unit, but instead they were separated into tribes across several countries. On the other hand, modern Druids believe that Druidism is a spiritual path, and don't necessarily look at gods and goddesses the same way as they are believed to in ancient times. Today, a Druid or Druidess may worship multiple gods or goddesses, or only one god. In other words, Druidism is very relaxed and accepting, much like Hinduism when it comes to beliefs in deities. An ancient god and an ancient goddess that we found interesting are Lu and Morrigan. Lu was known as the god of sun. He killed his evil grandfather, Balor, who had an evil eye that would kill with one look. Resultingly, Lu is celebrated with a feast in the beginning of August. Morrigan was known as the goddess of life and death. She is viewed as terrifying, but also as one who allows rebirth and regeneration. She is said to have been depicted as a crow. This is because crows do not kill, but they eat the dead, so that one day the dead will become new life.
The Druids are known to have taught metempsychosis, the transmigration of souls, or the process of being reborn into new bodies, sometimes human, sometimes animal. The Druids believed this is not a punishment, unlike in Hinduism or Buddhism, but seen as a natural part of existence. The Celts did not have a philosophy that this world is evil and must be escaped. Far from it. Instead, Wine, women, and song were celebrated at all times, and being reborn was considered a good thing. The Celts were also said to be unafraid of death because of their belief in this rebirth. The Druids also believed that the dead were transported to the other world by the god Bile. Life continued in this location much as it had before death. The ancient Druids believed that the soul was immortal, and after the person died in the other world, their soul reincarnates and lives again in another living entity, either in a plant or body of a human or other animal. After a person has learned enough at this level, they move on after death to a higher realm, which has its own otherworld. This continues until the individual reaches the highest realm, the Source. The Druids believed all things are created from the Source, including the gods. We are just sparks from its flame. At every birth, the Celts mourn the death of a person in the otherworld, which made the new birth possible.
The Druids celebrate 4 big festivals every year, called the Fire Festivals. The Fire Festivals celebrate each of the 4 seasons. They start at sunset and will last up to 3 or 4 days, and the Druids will celebrate by dancing around the fires. The first festival I will talk about is Samhain. Samhain roughly translates to the end of warm season, and will begin on November 1st. During Samhain, Druids will celebrate the life of the dead and will also celebrate the new year. Next of the 4 fire festivals is Imbolg. Imbolg translates to in the belly, meaning in the belly of the cold season. The Imbolg festival begins on February 1st and is also marked as the return of light. Around this time is when the Druids and Druidesses noticed more stirrings as animals began to wake from hibernation. Following Imbolg is the festival called Beltane. This festival is also known as the Fires of Bel and is celebrated on May 1st. The Fires of Bel are thought to celebrate the god Belinus. Belinus was also known as the Shining God or the Sun God. The fires lit during this festival are believed to represent the flames from Belinus. The Druids will herd cattle between the fires before releasing them into the new pastures to bring the cows good fertility. Additionally, young Druids will dance around the maypole to represent an old fertility ritual. The last fire festival of the Druidic year is known as Lunasa. Lunasa begins on August 1st and is a celebration for the deity Lu. As I mentioned earlier, Lu is the god of sun who killed his evil father Balor. The Druids and Druidesses will hold feasts for Lu in the days of celebration. Additionally, Lunasa celebrates the first harvest of crops. It is a time of joy for the Druids, with all of their fresh crops, but is also a time of worry for the short, cold days of winter that approach.
The religious practices of the ancient Druids were considered to be barbaric by early historians. In particular, they were appalled by the use of human sacrifice. The Romans reported that some victims were tied to wicker effigies and burned alive, a report reinforced by archaeological remains. Further evidence has been found of triple deaths, where a victim was simultaneously stoned, drowned, and impaled on a spear. This being said, Celtic religion did involve elements of ritual sacrifice, but, as mentioned before, Druids, and Celts in general, did not conceive of death the way in which we do today. Julius Caesar comments, "The cardinal doctrine which they seek to teach is that souls do not die, but after death pass from one to another. The fear of death is cast aside. Often, sacrifice involved a spiritual trade of sorts, sacrificing a less prominent member of society so that someone more important might survive."
Being that much of Druidism was destroyed long ago, there is not a lot of art in their history. There is, however, pieces of architecture in England and Ireland that have been associated with Druidism. The biggest structure most associated with Druidism is Stonehenge, but this is a mistake. In Druids Then and Now, Leigh Barry states the following: "It was during this period of romantic revival that most of the misconceptions about Druidism took root. The most common, linking Druids with Stonehenge, is clearly a fallacy. Recent archaeological findings date Stonehenge to more than 2,000 years before the rise of Druidism. Although Druids did use stone circles and astronomical calculations in their spiritual practices, no such monuments of their making have survived. Even though Stonehenge is a common misconception in Druidism, many modern-day Druids and Druidesses still go to Stonehenge to practice certain rituals." Another structure that has been associated with Druidism is the Drombeg Stone Circle. No one knows for sure whether or not the Drombeg Stone Circle was built by the Druids, but there is much suspicion that it was. The Dromebag Stone Circle is located in Dromebag, Ireland, and is comprised of 17 stones in a circle. It is thought that the Druids used to go to the stone circle to perform rituals and sacrifices. In fact, there has been cremated bones found at the stone circle, which has interested an archaeologist named Aubrey Burrell. Today, the Dromebag Stone Circle is simply a popular tourism site, and there has been no solid evidence of the ancient Druids having practiced at this stone circle.
One symbol that is associated with Druidism is the flag of the Isle of Man. It is an ancient Druidic symbol consisting of 3 curved branches, bent legs, or arms, radiating from the center of the symbol. Lastly, the wreath and staves, or Awen symbol. This is a symbol drawn in the form of 3 pillars, in which the outer 2 are sloped towards the center pillar. Sometimes 1 or 3 dots are added above the pillars. The symbol has been in use since the 17th century. It recalls the Druidic fascination for the number 3. Awen means inspiration in Middle Welsh. The left to right represents female energy, the right, male energy. The middle, the harmonious balance of male and female.